Hello, welcome back to the Cosmic Consciousness series. We're going to keep trying to end this series as quickly as we can because it's so much content. I've never done anything this vast. Today we'll be tackling 2 chapters because the second one is immensely long. So, yeah. Chapter 30 and 31. So chapter 30 is the case of MCL in his own words. Don't. Born about January 1853. I love how the writer always uses broken sentences. They're really professional. Born about January 1853. It is a difficult matter to write about myself. Oh, okay, he's writing about himself, okay. Especially touching an experience which for 4 or 5 years has been one of the most sacredly guarded events of my life. Dr. M described to me your theory of cosmic consciousness, which I at once recognized as defining, in a general way, a certain experience in my own life. I did not communicate the details to the doctor. I never had to anyone, lest I should be charged with superstition or madness. Early in my career, a reputation as a popular preacher was won, and the power to interest and hold an audience achieved. As a minister, I wrestled with the intellectual problems of the age, not only in the theological, but in the physical, sociological, and psychical realms. My desire for information was eager, and the search for truth honest and persistent. In the month of February 1890, just following my 37th birthday, Reverend J.E.L. of Canada came to assist me in a series of special meetings in my church. My affection for him gained during his stay. He had been gone for 3 days when, thinking of him far through the night, the gray of the morning was already in the heavens. The conviction came to me that in him I had met an incarnation of Christ. I stood a moment transfixed with the thought that is in his mind. Was that which I held as a theory to be realized as a fact? My friend was forgotten in the vision of Christ, who had come to me not from without, but through the gates which open inwardly. I knew him, was conscious of him in my own spirit, soul, and body. Then, with that unfolding consciousness, there came a suffusion as of a delicate cloud or haze, which searched the entire body, was more invasive than light, more penetrating than heat, more entreating than electricity. It was as if I had been plunged into a bath of fluid more subtle and permeating than ether. Against the inflow and outflow of that enswathing essence, the body was not as resistant as the air to a bird's wing or a morning mist to the sunbeam. The rapture, the exaltation, the divinity of that moment passes knowledge. Then swiftly came the awe of this, or the mysterious presence that filled me, and the consciousness of the whole creation universe went thrilling through me, not as a thought, a sensation, an emotion, but as the vital breath of God. This grew until I found myself rising and expanding, into the infinite, being diffused and lost therein, and the mind and body reeled. Feeling myself falling, I exclaimed, "The vision is too much. I cannot look upon the face of God and live. Father in heaven, it is enough." And the voice answered. I sank onto my bed and slept like a child. A few hours later, I woke in joy, which was unspeakable and full of glory. I knew what Paul meant by the unspeakable gift. The experience was to me the election, the calling of sonship to do the Father's will. I went to my pulpit, vibrant from subjection to the holy breath, and preached upon the text, "And I, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me." The sermon became intense. I saw the cross before me as the necessity of my life. Its agony and fear possessed me. The mind could not bear up under it. I staggered from my pulpit, the congregation awed by the anguish on my face and in my words. My family were alarmed, and a physician was called. He pronounced that I was suffering from nervous prostration, but found no symptoms of insanity, the horror of which had oppressed me. This guy, huh? The exhaustion was such that I felt the need of rest and went to my mother in the old homestead among the hills of Connecticut. To her I told the story. She said, "My boy, I have been expecting this. Now you know the truth of a living Christ." Of course she would, right? She's his mom. The character of my preaching completely changed. The old popularity has waned, but larger powers of mind have come, and the perception of truth is clearer. The holy breath kills lust, passion, hate, fills the heart with laughter and the soul with peace. I know the eternal Christ of Paul and John, the Christ manifested in the Nazarene, and who is the manifestation was the interpretation of the cosmic consciousness of the past and the typal form of the new race in whom the consciousness is evolved. It is the race of the sons of God, who, like Moses, have stood in the presence and been bathed in the glory of his beauty and the blessedness of his joy. Cosmic consciousness is the light of glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Okay, so footnote, compare Bhagavad Gita. Objects of sense draw back from a person who is abstinent. Not so the taste for these objects, but even the taste departs from him when he has seen the Supreme. So in answer to a request for further particulars, MCL adds, the haze or light was felt more than seen. The nearest approach to the sensation I ever knew was experienced when I was at Niagara and visited the Cave of the Winds, and also when from my window at Hotel Caltech, Hotel Caltech in Chamonix, I saw the sun rise on Mount Blanc. God damn. The tingle, subtler than the waves of color, was that of the experiences of fluid beryl or watery emerald. The mind slowly passed from fear into a distinct consciousness of some seemingly extra-natural event. At first my thought was, this is a stroke of paralysis, and I tested every function of my body and mind. Then the mind opened to understand something of what was going on. It kept pace with the sensation, and each progress of experience involved a mental process. I'm inclined to locate the point of contact in the mind. I use the word mind as synonymous with the psyche, which of course involves the personality. I always have believed that the event primarily was subjective, but a subjective experience which was in perfect accord with the entire objective universe. It was the exaltation of the subjective in me to a new relation with the objective in earth and heaven. This is the first attempt I have ever made to give a verbal history of the holy hour, and it has been with something of a feeling of hesitancy that I have written. But what is written is written. I like how the author, Buck, didn't even add his own account at the end of it. He just kind of just let it go. I guess he was just trying to be nice. He would have probably said, in my mind, he said, although this seems made to be some experience of subjective life, the author at present does not feel the veil has been lifted quite far enough to actually enter cosmic consciousness. And that's just in my words. But let's go on to chapter 31. Case of JWW, largely in his own words. He was born August 11th, 1853. The date of his illumination was January 20th, 1885. He is an architect. He has always been an earnest man, anxious to know the right and to do it. After the momentary attainment of cosmic consciousness, he became still more bent upon pursuing the same path. Before his illumination, he was an agnostic and skeptic, as the annexed autobiographic sketch will show. Not only did he not believe, but he had no hope. After illumination, he never again doubted the infinite beneficence of the central and overruling power of the universe. Although in the case of cosmic sense came for a moment only and then passed away, probably for the remainder of life, yet was the man by it incredibly ennobled. That seems the best term for the change that took place in him. Though not a Buddha, a Christ, or a Whitman, he was, from that time, clearly superior to the average man. In proof of which statement, the fact may be cited that a number of the best young men of his town sought him out and constituted him under the name of Master, their spiritual leader. These men have, as the present writer can personally testify, for years tendered this man their personal affection and reverence for no other reason than that they saw clearly in him a superior spiritual nature, which superiority was never detected or suspected in him until after the oncoming of the cosmic sense. In 1885, JWW has, since his illumination, devoted his life to the intellectual and moral elevation of himself and his friends. Here follows an autobiographic sketch written for the purpose of showing in what manner and under what circumstances he entered into the new life. The pages were not written for this book, nor at the instigation of the writer of it. They were, in fact, written before the present writer knew JWW. And sorry, I was thinking about when I was coughing back there. And for that reason are all the more valuable in this place. Neither were they written to illustrate or support any theory. JWW had and has no theory on the subject. All he knows, or perhaps cares to know, in this connection is that he at the moment entered into relation with a higher form of life and learned, as Paul says, unspeakable things, or unspeakable things. Such things, at all events, as were and are of quite unspeakable importance to him, any doubt of the truth of which things has been, and as he thinks, always will be entirely out of the question. JWW then, addressing his intimate friends, the young and middle-aged men mentioned above, who surround him, and as said, called him Master, spoke as follows. That's more like it, ain't it? Today, the 20th of January, 1890, is the anniversary of my mother's death 5 years ago. I have decided to celebrate it by giving you some account for circumstances which I have hitherto kept to myself and sacred in the recesses of my own heart and memory. I need not tell you, I think that my mother's last illness and death were, by immeasurable odds, the heaviest grief and pain, or, on the contrary, I have ever known or shall probably ever know or more or less give a fuck. But it is also true that the memory of them is for all time my most precious and priceless possession. Okay. That period was the supreme moment of my life. Moving on in my life and its deepest experience. In ordinary life, we live only on the surface of things, our attention distracted endlessly by the shallowest illusions and babbles. We discuss with a light heart and very much at our own ease the great problems we have been discussing lately in the college, that is, of immortality and the infinite goodness, but are not deeply concerned in them, and care but little what their solutions may be. But a great bereavement strips the scales from our eyes and compels us, in the intense solitude of our own souls, to gaze into the unfathomable depths, in which we float and to question their vast and solemn meanings. It comes upon us clothed in thick darkness and mystery and pierces our hearts with unutterable agony and grief, but it may be the darkest hours of its visitation, the supreme moment itself may also prove a revelation to our souls of the highest and bring us into the very presence of the infinite love and tenderness. For myself, I cannot doubt that this was my own experience. To speak of it is to profane it. I am unworthy to so much as hint at it, but it has been the comfort of my life ever since. Alas, for the years that have followed. One momentary glimpse into the ineffable brightness, followed by gathering clouds and darkness, painful stumblings and wide errors, unsupported by any recognizable spiritual aid or presence, the heavens deaf and careless to my most earnest prayers and agonizings, nay, even slighting them so far as appeared. Wow, I can relate to that. But through it all, like the steadfast shining of a clear star, the memory of that sacred time has remained deep in my heart, and I have never really doubted for a moment that an infinite wisdom and love does encircle all of our lives, tender, pitying, and sympathizing. We may pass our lives without ever realizing it, doubting it, nay, flatly denying it, but it is there. And he to whom the vision has ever come at all, though in the briefest transient flash of momentary consciousness, can never forget it, or never again forget it, rather, though his whole afterpath may be enveloped in darkness, and he himself may fall into gross error and backsliding. I received the ordinary Orthodox training of the Presbyterian Church. I was baptized and was a regular attendant at church and Sunday school till well on in my teens. I attribute at least equal importance in the formative elements of my religious training to the daily practice at home, while I was a boy, of family worship. I recall now, as I write with reverent emotion, the tender tones of my mother's voice, as it pleaded especially for her only deeply loved child. Well, at least somebody loved him. I was always a lover of books, and I was not far in my teens before I began to learn something of the opposition between the teaching of science and many of the beliefs I had been taught. This discovery was a gradual one, and I will only give a brief outline of the position in which I was ultimately landed. I learned that the first chapter of Genesis was at least a very crude statement of the actual fact. At one time, I was ardent and enthusiastic student of Hugh Miller's books, and rested content with the reconciliation he sought to establish between the teachings of his beloved science, geology, and the biblical record. But I had to give it all up when I came to read and study Darwin's and other books, and to acquaint myself with the most recent geological discoveries. I remember well the enthusiasm which I copied in writing Professor Huxley's famous address to the geological section of the British Association, in which he traced the pedigree of the horse to its progenitors in the Eocene period and the clear evidence of its evolution. Darwinism demolished for me the biblical account of creation, the authority of the Bible, and the account it gives of the origin of evil and the fall of man. This last clearly involves the whole theological superstructure based upon it, including the so-called scheme of redemption and the doctrine of the atonement. The legends of the flood, the Tower of Babel, the dispersion of man, and the origin of different languages were minor matters of comparatively trifling importance. I remember the delight which I read Tyndall's book on Heat as a Mode of Motion, it was titled, and reread it again and again. I read, too, his lectures on sound. These were my introduction to physics, from which I learned the great doctrines of the conservation and correlation of forces, as I had previously learned to realize in some degree the unity and uniformity of nature. In presence of such majestic and august conceptions, the ordinary ideas of prayer and miracles seemed childish. I remember reading Tyndall's Fragments of Science. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. It just keeps choking me up. I remember reading Tyndall's Fragments of Science and feeling this yet more strongly. See, that's my mother for you guys. That's how my mother treats me. hate that bitch. I came in to abandon the habit of prayer entirely. I don't blame you. One cannot read much in physiological science without serious reflection on the nature of consciousness, the relation between mind and physical structure, and the bearings of all this on the belief in personal immortality. It has always seemed clear to me that the only logical outcome of the considerations put forward by science are flatly and altogether opposed to such belief. To sum it up, science destroyed for me all belief in the biblical legends of the creation and the fall of man, etc., and in the doctrines of the atonement, and at least gravely questioned all narratives of miracle, the probability of answer to prayer, and the idea of personal immortality. The whole idea, too, of the divine incarnation of Christ on our insignificant atom of a world seemed out of keeping with the august spectacle of the infinite universe and its immeasurable duration. But my reading was never exclusively scientific, and my thoughts accordingly were always modified by other considerations. I like what he said there about the infinite universe and its immeasurable duration, because how long's it been since Jesus died? Like 2020 something years ago? And he said, the end is coming now, the end is coming now. Well, wake up, God. We're in the 21st century, and I don't see no end coming. Not now, not never. But that just goes to show you the foolery and the folly of people like that. Apocalypticists. That's what they call them. They were apocalypticists. Just like any homeless person you would see on the side of the street with a sign up saying, the end is coming now. Could you spare me a coin? Like, no, get a job. Get a job, Jesus. Furthermore, moving on, I learned something of Descartes, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, and Spinoza. What the effect of it all was upon me, it is impossible for me to now analyze or to tell. But let a man once get fairly into his head the teaching of Kant, or Kant, or whatever his name is, that time and space only exist as the condition of our consciousness, and the discussion of immortality will seem irrelevant. He will feel the very basis of his speculations crumble beneath his feet. From my earliest youth I have acknowledged two masters, to whom I continually turned and whom I have studied with ever-fresh interest and delight. That is Carlyle and Emerson. Two widely different men, but fundamentally alike in the absolute honesty and sincerity of their teaching, their noble and heroic character, and their steady, lifelong consecration to the service of the highest. Both of them rejected the materialistic conception of the world, which they regarded as spiritual in its essence, and each believed in his own way in a divine purpose. Emerson with genial and growing optimism, Carlyle with an accompanying Hebraic sense of the mystery and terror of evil. But neither from Carlyle nor Emerson will a student derive any firm conviction on the subject of individual immortality. I don't know why they put a period there, like in the middle of a sentence. That really screwed me up. Will a student derive any firm conviction of the subject of individual immortality? Anyways, Carlyle preferred to leave it a mystery, about which nothing can be definitely said with true assurance, but about which much may be hoped. Emerson, in the main, really believed it, but may be quoted on both sides of the subject. The questions we lust to have answered are, he declared, a confession of sin. He preached an unconditional submission and trust. Believe with all your heart and soul that all is well and ask no questions. Excuse me? If it is best that you should continue, you will do so. If not, you should not wish it. And the whole subject, he believed, belongs to a much higher plane than that on which it is usually discussed. It is 15 years since I carefully studied Tennyson, and especially in his in memoriam. His arguments, however, seemed to me unconvincing though powerful. I came to prize the 2 volumes I had of Browning's selections, but could not give complete adhesion to his views either. My judgment was suspended with a leaning of the heart to larger hope, another work. George MacDonald did me great and growing service, though I could never accept all his conclusions nor admire greatly his logic. On the other hand, the logic of George Eliot's creed seemed to be faultless, and her sympathy with opposite views complete. George Eliot's a girl? Wow, I've never heard a girl named George. Whoa. Okay, and her rigid and faithful devotion to truth and fact alone seemed to be rewarded in her art. George MacDonald's creation says, a rule seems ghostly abstractions. George Eliot's are alive, prick them and they bleed. I guess like all women. But the melancholy which her books create is undeniable, and the heart instinctively revolts from her creed. Matthew Arnold did me immense service by his theological books and opened the Bible for me again as a book of living interest. But his famous axiom that miracles do not happen and his elimination of the supernatural element are unmistakable. But a careful study of Isaiah with the help of his notes gave me a clue to a higher view, in my judgment, than the one he himself arrived at. He too depreciates the ascription of personality to God, and so does away with the impulse to pray. For who can pray to a stream of tendency, as he says? Here again, however, the light which he throws upon the character and teaching of St. Paul helps one also to realize better the teaching of Paul himself, which is higher than that of the critic. Ruskin believed in these things, but his authority is weakened by the evangelical teaching, which he himself in time discarded. The great masters seem to me inconclusive. The whole value of Dante's teaching is vitiated by his false and horrible presentations of eternal punishment. Shakespeare holds himself aloof from the subject, and his opinions do not lie on the surface. Goethe, I believe, to be more explicitly teach the efficacy of prayer and individual immortality than he actually did. I had long and a slight knowledge of and much curiosity about Whitman, and 12 months before my mother died, I read for the first time complete copies of Leaves of Grass and Specimen Days, and felt the deep thrill of contact with the mighty spirit. And it seemed a great thing that he, of all men, taught the doctrine of immortality with quite new emphasis and authority. The foregoings are only very crude and sketchy outlines of the intellectual groupings, questionings, studies, and complex many-sided experiences and difficulties of many years. But they will help you to partially, understand my position at the time I write of. And now to my narrative. Okay, now finally to his narrative. I will not trouble you with any particulars which do not seem to me necessary for my purpose, and these I will give as briefly as it is consistent with the clearness and bright coloring of the picture I want to present. I feel, however, that I must, at my outset, make a disclaimer. I do not want you to judge of my character as a son from my devotion to my mother on her deathbed. As a matter of fact, I was never, in the true sense, a good son. I have too many grave faults and strong opposing idiosyncrasies for that, and I have innumerable bitter memories of harshness, temper, selfish, want of consideration and sympathy, things left undone that I ought to have done, and things done that I ought to have left undone. They are past recall or expiration now, and I can only pray and strive for a better nature in future. It is perhaps hardly necessary to speak of my mother. She was not without faults or weaknesses either. She had good qualities in an exceptional degree that I need not analyze or speak of, but it is necessary for my purpose that I should refer to what was her ruling passion, a deep, constant, absorbing, and self-sacrificing love for her only son. Everyone knows something of the sacred depths of a mother's love, but very few can sound their profound abysses as it has been my lot to do. Many circumstances threw us more together than is usual. For one thing, my father was much from home. My own tastes and pursuits kept me more closely at home than in the case with the most young men. Our natures, too, were similar in many ways. Naturally, I was in many things my mother's confidant. Her sufferings and declining strength made her more and more dependent upon me and knit our hearts together more closely as time went on. She suffered excruciating pains at times. She became lame and lost the power to stand. If my father was at home, he would carry her upstairs at night to bed. If not, she crept to the foot of the stairs and pulled herself up step by step. But on no account would she let me carry her, fearing that I might strain or hurt myself. But eventually she had to allow me, and after that I always carried her upstairs. She was always poorly in the morning and suffered great internal pain. I used to regularly take her up a cup of tea to breakfast, but she ate next to nothing. Some 18 months before she died, she told me that she believed she suffered from an internal cancer. I had long urged her to let me call in a doctor, and I had now insisted upon it. For a long time she would not allow it, but finally yielded, and Dr. R was called in. She seemed more bright and cheerful after his visit. She told me that his verdict was that it was not a cancer, but the facts which led her to think it was were the results of her rheumatism. It was a happy relief to me, and I dismissed altogether the dreadful ideas which had weighed like lead upon my heart. As a matter of fact, it was a cancer, and my mother soon came to know it without a shadow of doubt. But in her self-sacrificing regard for me, she kept all knowledge back from me, and in the weary, painful, and gloomy months that followed, I lived in the absolute ignorance of the real facts of the case. Perhaps it was better so. I really believe that if I had known, the dreadful knowledge would have killed me. As it was, I was supported by groundless hopes. And even so, the pain of it and the daily strain on my heart and mind were almost more than I could bear, and their effects have remained with me ever since. I will say as little as possible of that time. I will only note her visibly declining strength, the solitude and many miseries of her lot, her absorbing and endless solicitude for me, her complete indifference to self, and her constant spirit of loving self-sacrifice, and a love in both our hearts that grew more tender and profound as we realized more and more the coming and inevitable end. The countless heartaches and pains of those days only revealed more clearly the depth and strength of a love which was mightier than all adverse circumstances, even death itself. So the days and weeks and months dragged on in ever-deepening gloom till the fateful month of January 1885. As my mother's strength became less and less over time, her time for going to bed grew earlier. From 10 to half past 9 to 9 to half past 8 to 8. It pained me excessively to note this, and every night she had gone, I felt unspeakably sad and wretched as I thought of the future. I could not bear to part with her. I used to keep her as long as possible, joke with her, and do my best to cheer her as well as myself. But her weariness getting too great, she would often lose patience and say, with pathetic entreaty, "Willie, do take me. Why don't you take me?" Or, "Willie, do let me go." After that, there was nothing for it but to take her at once. On the night of January 1885, I went to a birthday party. I was far from well and I had no heart for it, but I went to tea, came home at 8 to take my mother to bed, for the last time it turned out, and went back, not returning till between 1 and 2. During the night, I was awakened by my mother knocking at the wall. She felt faint, she said, and asked me to bring her a glass of water. I asked if I should make tea, and she said she preferred water, which I got her. I grieve to say that I was altogether harsh, unsympathetic, and ungracious. I ought to have known that she needed more, and without a moment's thought for myself, should have got it. She thanked me with her usual tenderness, and I went to bed again. Next morning, when I took her tea, it all came out. During the night, she had crept out of bed and fainted on the floor. On recovery, she had managed with much painful effort to get into bed again. She would not disturb or trouble me, knowing what she did, but felt compelled at last to rouse me and asked for a glass of water. Fancy it, cold water, and rendered with unsympathetic grumbling at that. I have never forgiven myself for my far worse than stupidity and callousness. My mother, however, in her sweet, serene charity and loving kindness, forgave me from the first. I will not go into details of the illness that followed. She did not get up that day, though serenely cheerful, hopeful, and loving. My father came home in the afternoon, and she seemed a bit better, but at night grew worse and slightly delirious. Early next morning, Sunday, I brought the doctor, and I learned for the first time what others knew, that she had been really suffering from cancer all the time, and that recovery was impossible, though the inevitable end might possibly be averted for a time. It was a horrible blow to me. I hunted up a nurse and was in constant attendance of her myself till the end came, 9 days after. On Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, she continued to improve, and my heart grew lighter and more cheerful. Then she began to grow worse and went step by step down into the valley of the shadow. I will pass on rapidly on the closing scenes, but I must note first the following traits of my mother's behavior. An utter and complete forgetfulness of self, unfailing love and charity to all, serene cheerfulness and even gaiety, exerting herself always to cheer me with bright and loving smiles and consoling hopeful words. This, of course, only while she was able. At night she always grew delirious, of which more anon. I'm sorry to give you painful details, and I only do so where it is necessary for my ultimate purpose. But I am compelled to give you some details of closing scenes. The night but one before she died, and was the most horrible night I have ever spent. As usual in such wasting diseases, the waste of the body, after devastating the muscular system, attacks the nervous system. When this stage is reached, the patient enters on a period of horrible unrest and weariness, passionately longing for rest and incessantly and vainly seeking it by change of position. Every night, in the delirium of her illness, she felt something of this weariness, and would, at the close of the day, call on me in the old familiar words, "Willie, do take me upstairs, do take me." On this particular night, similar cries rang in my ears the whole horrible night long. "Willie, do take me, do let me go. Why don't you let me go?" The words pierced my heart. I knew that the rest she sought could only come in death, and my heart was hot in angry rebellion. I could not let her go. Fate was too much for me, but it was an unspeakable, cruel fate, and every faculty in me in passionate protest and resentment. I changed her position again and again, adjusted and smoothed her pillow, and for a few brief moments she would lie quiet. Then again the old incessant heart-piercing cries, "Willie, do let me go. Do take me. Why don't you let me go?" And so, again and again, through this whole length of the horrible night. Next day she was quieter. The doctor said it was only a question of hours. In the afternoon she seemed utterly exhausted, and for a time we thought she was dying. My father, Mrs. D, the nurse, and I stood looking on in the momentary expectation of the end. I was quite tired out, heart and body, sullen and resentful. It was a piece with the whole horrible thing. It was a piece with the whole horrible thing that she should die thus, without any sign or leave taking. But it was not to be done so, and she revived again. About 7 o'clock that night, I was alone with her. She felt unconscious. I kneeled at her bedside, my face down on the bed. My brain felt scorched, and the whole thing a horrible nightmare. It was no longer my mother lying there, but a ghastly automaton. I myself an automaton, both alike driven in a vast world machine, remorseless, brainless, and heartless, crushing all before it. Later on, my father coming upstairs must have been alarmed about me and compelled me to go an errand, which he declared absolutely necessary. I think it probable that my going out for a short time saved my reason. Late at night, my father drove me to bed. I refused. I could not go or lose any of the precious time now left with me with my mother, but I agreed ultimately to go for 2 hours at most, if he would rouse me sooner in case of change. Very reluctantly I went, but I was quite spent, and I slept soundly till 6, my father letting me sleep on. I at once hastened to the room and stayed there till the end, about 1 o'clock. My mother was apparently the same, but weaker. She welcomed me with a sweet old smile, and responded always as before with a loving kiss to mine. She was quite conscious, but too weak to speak. The morning dragged on till noon, when I heard Mr. T in the kitchen with my father. I asked her if she would like to come up, and she nodded a pleased expression of her wish. He came and prayed at her bedside, my mother following it all with full appreciation, her head supported by my arm, shaking with the extreme palsy of coming death. She tried to express her thanks and followed him with grateful eyes as she left the room. Later, about 1 o'clock, my father and the nurse went downstairs. Mrs. D remained, but I asked her to go too and leave me alone with my mother. I then asked mother if she would like me to pray with her. I had never done so, but I fancied that she wished it, and she assented with evident satisfaction. Standing at the foot of the bed, I prayed briefly to God, our Father, to mercifully release my mother from her suffering and take her to himself and guide and help me in the lonely path that lay before me. I then turned away a minute or two to the window. Looking around, I saw instantly that the last change had come. I hastened to moisten her lips, but her tongue was rigid. I went to the top of the stair and called my father. He hastened up and was just in time to catch the last futile attempt at breath. In an access of very strong emotion, I cried out, "Thanks be to God that giveth us the victory." And it seemed to me, excited fancy, that my mother's spirit nodded assent. It seemed to me for the moment that I stood in the very presence of the infinite love and felt it through my being. I went downstairs and told Mrs. D and the nurse that it was all over, and they went upstairs to render the last sad offices. I came into this room, the room in which this paper was read, and gave myself up to a long heavy fit of sobbing, however, no longer of grief, but of great relief, recognition of the mighty comfort that had finally come into my heart, and of resigned and loving farewell. During the days that followed and until after the funeral, I felt a great calm and peace of mind and heart, a peace of mind which I venture to say was no other than the peace of God that passes all understanding. It passed away, but the memory of it remained. Grief and the sense of irrecoverable loss and had their natural course, and I spent many weeks of sleeplessness and tears. I have no hope that my words will convey me more than a poor fraction of the real facts. At best, I can only sketch these in the rudest outline. But I will ask you to consider a few of the most prominent in the narrative I have given you. Remember what I have said of the spiritual questionings of many years and their results. Consider how my mother's long and frightful suffering revealed and strengthened as nothing else could, not only the sweet and lovable qualities of her heart and mind and the strength of hope and faith which sustained her through it all, but also the length and breadth and depth of her wonderful self-sacrificing love for me, which grew only stronger, deeper, and more tender as she advanced further into the shadow of our inevitable parting. And when the last stroke fell upon her and she was confined to her bed never to rise again, think how grateful and sweet to me were those days of slight improvement when I was privileged to attend her constantly and show her, as I never could before, the reality and depth of responding love, and receive her entire forgiveness for all the thoughtlessness and wrongdoing of the past, and her heartfelt blessing. And hastening on to the closing scene, think of the horrible night when her incessant cries rang out to me, "Let her go," and I knew it was meant to let her go to the last rest of death. And my heart stood out in passionate resentment and protest against a cruel and merciless fate. Think of that scene next day when her strength seemed gone and we watched for the end, and I felt, with sullen resentment, that it was only a piece with all the rest that should die thus, without any sign or leave-taking, in the presence of comparative aliens not of her own household, while I, her son, born of her body, bone of her bone and flesh of her flesh, the one person whom she loved with almighty love of her great heart, stood as an outsider beyond her consciousness. Think of that hour, that evening, when, with scorched brain, I felt through and through my being the dreadful significance of the materialistic creed, that we were mere automatic parts of a vast machine, brainless, heartless, merciless, and cruel. Think of the providence by which restoring and healing sleep was granted me to make me capable of a truer vision. Think of the tender grace of our next morning's communion, my mother's full consciousness, and the sweet tokens of her undying love. Think of the providence which led Mr. T to come within an hour of the end and offer up a solemn prayer in which my mother could join with full appreciation and company with my father and myself. Think of the fitness of the arrangement by which, at the last moment, my mother and I were left alone as she would have wished. Think of the divine training by which my rebellious heart was bowed in acquiescence and resignation. Think of the course by which my antagonism and skepticism were laid low, and I was led, with my mother's pleased concurrence, at last to let her go. and to call audibly on the Divine Father of all to take her to himself. And think how immediately the prayer was answered and God revealed himself to me, and I felt through all my being, in the moment of her death, the presence of infinite love, the Divine Comforter soothing me with a strange and ineffable peace. Human words are poor instruments for the expressions of such realities, but beyond the touch of all possible argument, despite the apparent experiences of my life since and my backslidings, I knew that a divine providence was at work in my hour of utmost need, summing up the long gropings and processes of the past, and despite all earthly darknesses and sin, illumining all my future course with an infinite hope. I no longer trouble myself with the difficulties raised by metaphysics and philosophy about the personality of God, for however that may be, I know that there is that in him to which I may address myself as to a loving friend and father. I no longer trouble myself with the discussions about God's providence and the contrary evidences of life and experiences, for I have seen his providence visible at work, summing up in a crowning experience the processes of long years in events which were entirely natural in their order and course, but were also visibly supernatural and miraculous too. I no longer trouble myself with the doubts about God's love and the contrary evidences furnished by the world's sin and endless miseries, for in the midst of the heaviest grief of my own life, I have seen an ineffable tenderness and love revealed, which crowned and justified the sufferings which preceded it and illumined much that lay dark and mysterious in the past. However, this poor outline may strike you, I know that the actual facts were more fit and beautiful than any earthly poet could have conceived in his most gracious and tender mood. I no longer trouble myself with the current discussions about immortality, for I know that my mother is secure and that all is well with her, for unworthy as I am, I have myself seen the ineffable glory of the love which received her when she was taken from me. Okay, summary. JWW's narrative makes it quite clear that he had the earnestness of mind and desire for spiritual growth, which, as we have seen, seems to be prerequisites to illumination. B, his age upon the occurrence of this last was 31 and a half years. C, there was no experience of subjective light. D, intellectual illumination was well marked. E, and moral exaltation, still more so. F, although he does not give details, perhaps could not do so, it is clear that he experienced something very akin to the cosmic vision, if he did not even see the Brahmic splendor itself. G, the peace and knowledge spoken of by Whitman and referred to by all cases as one of the chief results of the attainment of nirvana, the cosmic sense, came to JWW unmistakably instantaneously. H, the strict parallelism of this case with all the others given will be recognized by every careful reader. So, the end, it was like he finally realized the power of his own word, the power of logos. So he spoke it out into existence and he got exactly what he was asking for. That's pretty cool. We all have the power of the voice. We just have to activate it, know how to get it going, get the ball rolling with it. Have a great day.